Wow, those street interviews, Rob, it exceeded expectations. And I think I came in with uncertain expectations, but man, so we're continuing on this journey. We listened to those street interviews more than once to reflect on them. So we've listened in the car, we're driving, and now it's just two guys having a conversation about what they learned. Rob, what are you thinking about the whole experience? Like, what's your overall impression?
I was feeling energized, like I had just done something eternally beneficial and meaningful. And it was something that I hadn't felt or experienced in a long time.
I totally agree with you.
I'm not sure I can still like put it into words, but it felt like the conversations were, I don't know if ordained is the word, but it was like those conversations were there and all we had to do was go find them. In other words, those were conversations in a sense that needed to happen, but wouldn't have happened if there wasn't someone there to engage with them. Are those stories, are those thoughts, does anyone give them voice if no one is asking the questions?
It's nice to just get out of the four walls of the church, isn't it? Like we spend, now I'm not devaluing, like we need to be instructed. We need guidance. And not only do we need guidance biblically, we need each other as a support system. But man, there's some life. It's like you're actually getting out to do what you've trained for, right? Like imagine training and then never doing the challenge. Like I think about our rim to rim challenge, right? Like imagine if we did the training all the time and then never went to the Grand Canyon, right? Like what's the point? And I think that was part of it for me of like, wow, I exercised the muscle I've been working out for a while.
Yeah, Neil, I think even going back a little further than how we felt as we were driving away, walk us through a little bit about how we were feeling on the front end. Because, I mean, there were some funny observations there as well. I mean, I know we're here to reflect on the conversations, but I think it's worth saying that we were really kind of nervous.
Oh, totally nervous. Like we went and grabbed some lunch and kind of talked about the plan. Then like we're like driving to actually go. And Rob and I just kind of get giddy in the car. Like we're laughing about silly stuff. Like we start laughing about how these street interviews turn into us panhandling the people we're asking questions, and we think it's hilarious. Like, right. and then we just both kind of look at each other and realize we're really nervous. Yeah. Like it's okay. Like we can relax.
We were targeting the walking bridge here in our town in Chattanooga, and then we walked out to the bridge, and there wasn't a soul on the bridge, and we were a little discouraged, and so we had to have a little change of venue, which I think was, part of the plan, part of God's plan, because we ended up in a perfect place.
Yeah, it wasn't a great day. Like it was overcast,
rainy,
yeah. Cold. So we ended up down by the aquarium, which is kind of like one of the main attractions here in Chattanooga. But I agree with you. It was the perfect place.
Welcome to a World in Tension podcast, a place where we examine the opposing pulls and struggles of life to uncover clarity, purpose, and practical solutions. Come join us as we seek to get comfortable facing the uncomfortable. This is a World in Tension.
I think it's important to give that little bit of context as we reflect back over some of these conversations. They didn't happen easily in the sense that it took us a little bit to get over the hump of nerves.
I think it's a good early application. Like, you know what? Take a chance, do something a little bit out there, and it's pretty life-giving.
Very much so.
All right, let's get into the specifics of some of these individual interviews. So, I mean, there was 23 total people that we talked to just randomly. They were not set up. Just some of the numbers, 43% of them said they didn't go to church, 57 did. So a pretty even split. Each one of them kind of brought value in different ways, but there were a few of them that just stood out. And so, like, just to kind of organize the conversation a little bit, let's talk a little bit about those that didn't go to church first. So who stood out to you in those conversations?
One of the things I'll say first off is that we didn't ask people specifically what their name was. We've given each of them a name or a designation. And so if you hear us referring to them in that way, that's what's happening there for their anonymity. So for me, I think one of the first non-church people that really impacted me was the young mom who said that she was an atheist or an agnostic and had been her whole life. And she was reflecting on how hard it was for her to grow up in the South. You mentioned Chattanooga as being one of the most Bible literate cities, but it's probably one of the most church cities in America. And there is a culture of Christianity in this city. And I think it was really interesting to hear her talk about how hard that was for her and for her children in their school, and her in her workplace.
Yeah, and what struck me about that is you have to imagine it was hard, but yet she was like laughing about it to try to minimize it. And kind of in general, when I listen to a lot of these people who don't go to church, the common theme is there was a lot of hurt, whether expressed kind of this way or more explicitly expressed.
One of the things that was interesting, and she said this as well, and this came up at least twice. It may have come up 3 times, but when we asked what would it take to get you back into church, this atheist individual said it would take a miracle. I mean, I think she said something to the effect of, like the sky would have to part and God would have to say something specifically about the importance of the role of the church in her life. And I know we had another person mention a miracle or seeing something miraculous. And I haven't gotten to pick that apart in my mind yet, but I think there's something there, and I'm not sure, what that is. And I'm not sure what the church can do to provide that.
I don't think they can. I mean, what I instantly think about is the words of Jesus that you're basically people looking for a sign are never going to be given good enough evidence. And so, I mean, and part of this that we talked about, Rob, is like, we wish we could have some other additional conversations with these people. I mean, this was to me, the art of listening. We were just listening to people. Yeah. And so let me say something early on. If any of the people that we interviewed on the street, you have our email address, it's in the main header for our podcast. If you want to reach out to us, do it, because we'd be happy to have conversations with you. But anyway, I just want to say that quickly. But ultimately, everyone has to have faith in whatever view they have, whether that's Christianity or having no religion. You have to have faith on some level.
Well, and that faith is a gift.
It is.
And that does come from God. So, I think it's a gradual softening of the heart of an individual like this to be able to hear it or see something that isn't maybe what we would talk about as a traditional miracle, but maybe the church, reaching out in love to someone like her becomes, in a sense, a type of miracle for her. Like love breaks through, in a sense. That's a cliche, but maybe that's part of it.
I agree with you. I think that's actually a kind of one of the bigger reflections too, is how much hurt the church people who misrepresented Christ hurt people. And yeah, when you, I mean, our whole thing on this show is surrendering to Christ. I think, no one gets that perfect. We all struggle with it. But when you do, you're letting Christ work through you. That is supernatural. That is a miracle. People should see something different. But I think with her, it's in a lot of other people, it's just like there's other questions to talk about. There's other things that can be discussed that will help show you that maybe you don't necessarily need a miracle. I want to transition to someone else that instantly stood out to me, and we called her the former Baylor student. what I appreciated about her is that she was very articulate about some serious pains. Like she talked about her time at Baylor and how eating disorders and people were chasing perfection in the name of Christ. And she said it, and said that she's very hurt by it and she carries wounds. But so her ability to just express that, and she doesn't know us at all. But then also, I think the really cool part was she was open still after all this hurt. Those are pretty traumatic hurts, to say, yeah, but I still want to consider, like, maybe there is a loving church out there. Maybe. So to me, it indicates a pursuit of truth. This person wants to find truth. What does that person need to hear?
What would have been a response in her situation to, for instance, a street preacher calling people names like a harlot or a, this or a that? I think what you mentioned there, that the questions that we asked were fairly non-threatening, and they gave a forum to allow people to speak, and for us to just listen, and for them to potentially ruminate on the topic of church. And maybe someone like that who's not going to church week in and week out, they may not think about church really much at all. I mean, it may not come up in their cycles of thought, and this may have been the first time in a while that some of these people even thought about church.
The value of the implicit, like we didn't expressly say, Jesus loves you, here's the plan of salvation. We just listened to people. And what really stood out to me is I think people were expecting what I call a Jesus juke. Like, we ask you these questions and then here's the track. And we didn't do that. And people were like, that's it? Like, you just wanted to listen to me? Yes, that was the first step. The art of listening is what we're calling this episode. That man, the value of that, especially in our splintered, fractured world, really stuck out to me. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying you should never say anything about Christ. I mean, obviously, we have a podcast where we're talking about Christ all the time, right? I'm just saying it's a point on the journey, and it's the entry point. And don't think you have to solve all the problems. I think you're right. I think a lot of these people are now thinking about Christ or church or something differently. A seed has been planted, and God is working.
Well, I would say this, and I think we both could listen back to the whole conversation with the young lady that went to Baylor, and we could probably hear things that we would not think are orthodox in her line of thinking. But that's not the objective. You don't try to fix a person's thinking first. The Holy Spirit changes lives. God softens hearts. And if we are arguing our way into being right to try to convince people, I don't think it's the proper first step. I truly do think listening is, and opening up a dialogue, because then you have opportunities to, hear where people are at, hear why they're struggling with certain things or certain aspects of the faith, and then allow God to work, or to begin to work, or plant a seed. And I think that's key. It really is, because we're never going to argue someone into the kingdom.
These people, I think, can be grouped together. I called her church MMA because of all the church fighting. And then there's the agnostic Australian. So why I want to kind of pair them together is that...
Well, I hope he's Australian and not from New Zealand.
Well, that would just... Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you're from New Zealand. Anyway, but it just flowed, agnostic Australian, but anyway, what's interesting about those two is that there's hurt expressed in both of them. The church MMA, she was talking about all the fighting in the church and how she encountered really two things: really ugly people that didn't like each other, or kind of the people that didn't accept you. If you know, you know. Hashtag if you know, you know. And like, man, those are both such ugly representations of who Christians are supposed to be. And it grieves me that that's what she's experienced. But then you have the agnostic Australian that he kind of fell out of it, out of church culture, and he just kind of more casually said, I've just seen people with an axe to grind, and it's hurtful and not how people should be treated. And so I find my community outside where I find more genuine, authentic people. They're both saying the same thing. It's just a different level of intensity.
They both really wanted community.
Yes.
He wanted to go back to church, or would be willing to go back to church if his community was going with him.
Yeah, as she did too.
And she was, she and her husband were very hungry for community. I think the church, in a sense, provides something very beautiful for people in that it is a place for community. The irony, though, is that once you're in community, we have to remember we have to be willing to go out and invite others in.
Totally agree. And I have some thoughts on that in the end. One point I want to make too is the listener doesn't get the privilege not only to see the faces, but also some of the side conversations we had. And with some of these people, we had some really cool side conversations. For example, the church MMA person came back and was just asking us about where their eating recommendations, and kind of just talking about what a healthy church could look like, and where they live.
I think if they had lived closer to us, they would have come to church with us the next week.
Yeah, I agree with you. Mm-hmm. So that there was a lot of cool stuff that was off the record. All right, let's transition to people who went to church. Who stood out to you in that crowd that you want to point out or talk through some insights you learned?
I think the main person that stood out to me wasn't a standout in the middle of the conversation. We had this interesting experience of having a young guy come talk to us on his way to get something from a car in a parking lot. And he said, "What are you guys doing? Are you guys street preaching?" And we were like, "No, we're just asking questions." And he's like, "Well, there's a guy in the aquarium who's been weeping for a few minutes, and he had just talked with you, and I thought maybe he, something had happened, and I just wanted to come out and say hi on my way to get something, and I didn't want to take up any of your time because I figured what you're doing is more valuable than talking to me." It turns out that this young man was a guy who had told us that he was involved in church, and he had some very interesting things to say to us about what he felt like his church was doing well and what it wasn't doing well. But what really impacted me was he was moved by the fact that there were Christians out engaging strangers. And I think it sort of touched something inside of him. That was really an interesting interaction. I was blown away by it.
We called him the praying prophet because we actually recorded, he prayed for us and we recorded it. It didn't make it into the episode, but he was sorrowful and encouraged at the same time he wanted to be in a community that was doing things like we were doing, which we want to be in it too. It's not like we're doing this every day.
Right. No.
But I think we almost shared the same encouragement in different ways.
I think in hindsight, he was with a young lady when he came through the first time. And I think the young lady said to him, "Oh, this would be right up your alley."
Yeah.
It's almost like he was struggling with something. Like he may have been down because he felt like the church wasn't being as effective or reaching people in a way that he wished that they were. And, I think the conversation was an encouragement to him as much as it was an encouragement to us. I think that was really a neat interaction.
I totally agree. So
what about you? What was one of the ones that really impacted you?
All right. So the one that stood out to me was the young Christian professional. What really stood out to me was his focus on saying the church could be better about prayer. He was the only one that said it. He was talking about how people don't want to come back to church on a Wednesday night or whatever just to pray. And I feel that tension in myself because it's a true there's a few things going on with that. It's a true sacrifice to set aside time to just pray. It's much easier to listen, feel encouraged. Like it's almost like it serves us more. But praying, just to pray for other people, is a sacrifice. But also, it's really saying, I believe God can work. The encouragement to me too was, because we're talking about how do we effectively engage in the world, we should pray more about that, right? We should let the Spirit work. What if we got together and prayed about that more regularly? So it stood out to me that he was the only one that said it as a need. And I think he's right.
Well, I mean, look, take this opportunity to contrast that with kind of an overarching theme that we did hear from many of the churched individuals. And you've commented on it, so comment on it now.
When people thought about outreach, it usually was a conversation about the poor and needy. So it involves giving some sort of food or clothing. And alongside that, hey, we'll talk about Jesus and show you love in that way. And it really just stood out, man, the contrast between, that's just one demographic. And there's all these people we talk to that don't fit that demographic, that are hurting, that they have serious hurts, and they actually just want to talk to people, which actually leads me to someone, which is the 17-year-old daughter of the single dad. She was talking about how she was impacted by the church community here in Chattanooga that was different from Florida, and she was very articulate for a 17-year-old. I told her dad he did a good job, but where I think she really nailed it, and I'm connecting it to my earlier point, is that it's not just about this one-off thing. It's about discipleship and the need for discipleship. And what I kind of pieced together in hearing all of the voices is there are missing segments of society that are hungry. And we talked to some of them who are hurt, they're hungry, they want some answers, and they need people to disciple them. And people are like, well, what does that mean exactly? It's just meeting them where they are at first, listening to them, but talking through, painting a real picture of who Christ is. I mean, what stood out to me is a lot of these people have been painted a poor picture of who Christ is. And there's a lot of people inside the church building that are not painting pictures for people, and showing the true beauty of who Christ is, who he says he is. And it's not about rules. It's not about do's and don'ts. It's about the beauty of Christ in the end of the day, his value.
You don't have to understand a Wayne Grudem's systematic theology book to become a Christian.
Yep.
Right? That comes later. And it helps us as Christians to understand the world that we live in, the God that we worship, and how better to serve him. But that's not a prerequisite to becoming a believer or entering into the church. And I think that's something that I've not thought about correctly. I don't have to convince somebody of every little, jot and tittle of Scripture. Yeah. I just have to convince them that they are loved by Jesus.
Yeah, which is a good point too. The Wayne Grudem Christian, let's just call him that, right? And we would even fall in that camp. We've studied that book,
yeah,
right?
We spent a year in it, right?
So here's the message to those people. Awesome that you have that you've thought through theology that way. Put down those filters in just talk with people, meet them on a human level, and allow the stuff you've learned through Grudem, through your pastor, through the Bible and your own study, let that just permeate. You talked about gospel threads, right? I think we want to we don't want to leave gospel threads. We want to throw the whole ball of yarn at them all at once. And it's this is too much, right?
Well, that was one of the most impactful sermons I'd heard about evangelism in a long time was this idea of weaving gospel threads into your conversation. And I feel in a sense, this was the needle first entering into the to the fabric. This experiment with talking with people on the street, it was like the beginning of weaving a gospel thread into the conversation with some of these individuals.
So there's probably more we could say about different individuals, but Rob, I want to move to, and I think we've done a good job of kind of peppering in some insights along the way with some of these people. But like, as you step back from listening and our conversation, like, I always want to have something that I like at least run with. So it's not just this mental exercise, like what can I actually hold on to? What can I pray about to actually try to become part of what I'm doing? So did anything stand out to you as kind of a key insight that you want to take into your life?
The most amazing thing was that people were willing to open up and share fairly intimate struggles and details of their hurt or painful situations in their lives. It's almost like they were hungry to be able to share it with somebody. And so the idea that I have nothing to offer, or that people are going to be immediately hostile to a Christian, that was disarmed for me in this part of the journey, that people are hungry for these conversations. They want to be heard, they want to share, and they're willing to be open.
You know what? I just had an interesting thought. So like lowest on that list as far as biblically literate is like, I think it's Providence, Rhode Island, which we know someone who ministers there. And this is just coming to me now. I wonder what, if you went to the other extreme, what would those conversations look like on the street there? My initial gut reaction to what you said is I would experience more hostility because they don't want nothing to do with it, right? Like 90% of the people don't want anything to do with it. But I think I would find humanity.
I think you would. I really do. I think you would. I think people really do want to talk.
You know, there's a lot of hostility in their hearts and like maybe in social media, but when you get people face to face, we're just humans. Like we have hurts. We need people to help process through them. So
I think what I do is, in my mind, I want to offer the solution before I know the problem. And I think that might be one of the problems with the way I've looked at evangelism, because it feels like I'm going and offering a solution to a problem I don't even know about. So if the conversation starts with understanding what a person's problem is, all of a sudden the response over time is a little more natural, I think.
no, I think you're totally right. So what is that? How do you live practically differently because of that insight? I think it's a great insight. Like, what is there anything you?
Well, you have to ask questions. I mean, it's what you've said is the working title of the episode. It's listening. I mean, if we're not listening to the world's problems, then we're not able to appropriately apply the solution.
This idea kind of light bulbed for me when I was piecing the different conversations together, and I thought it was the guy who we actually didn't talk about, which was, we called him Dad Holding Daughter, because there's this guy who had this little daughter strapped to his chest as he's doing the interview, and we're trying to hold the mic away from the daughter.
She was trying her best to participate in the interview. She was talking, babbling, cooing. It was so cute.
Yeah, you could know who we're talking about from the background noise. But he said something that I didn't realize would impact me this way, which he said, you know, we need to be better about marketing the church. And I was kind of like, and he was talking in reference to young people, but the thought entered my head. In the business world, we talk about customer segmentation. Like, for example, people who would be interested in, I work in electric utility, so like people interested in energy efficiency, renewables, like doing that kind of thing in their home. How do you, and it's not just for that industry, many industries segment their customers so they know who to reach out to, how to reach out to them. And I had this thought of, man, the only segment the church is looking at seems to be, and maybe doing it not too well, is just the homeless, poor, needy. And that's kind of, to be honest, a little bit, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but it's a little bit of a discouraging group because a lot of times you feel like you're giving and they just take, and there's no response, there's no change. It feels very one-sided and discourages the people ministering. So, and I think that's why people don't go back. But the idea is, what if we had people in our church that we mobilized that could reach different segments of the society, some of these people we talk to that could be impactful to reaching them, right? There's certain people that are going to be more drawn to me, more drawn to you, more drawn to other people that look different, sound different, whatever it is, right? Different experience, background. And what if we were in tune more to those people? Because it just stood out to me about it's the humanity. There's just humanity that's hurting. It's not just the poor and needy. That's like too obvious. And how do we think about ways of that segmentation and reaching out? I also think you had a great idea in terms of like, what would you call it? The open church?
Yeah, church in the open.
Church in the open.
I mean, I went to a church in downtown that was walking distance from a really popular park, and I always thought that the Christmas Eve service should be candlelight, but walking and singing from the church to the park, and that the remainder of the singing and message should happen in the park, out in the open, for anybody that wants to participate, to join.
I think if a church did that like once a month, that would be super awesome. And again, I think I'm trying to make a point to an earlier comment too. It's not only about making it accessible to the people out on the street who may never come in the building, but it's also about the people in the building getting out of the four walls and seeing a different perspective. Like we saw a different perspective. That's what it was so exhilarating about it, because we opened ourselves up to it and we saw humanity out there.
I think as I try to process what you're saying and maybe even refine it a little bit, I think what we're saying is, the poor, the needy are an important group of people to minister to, and
Yes.
meeting physical needs is going to open up conversations.
Absolutely.
But to typecast the person who needs the gospel as only the poor and needy, or as the only group that we're reaching out to, or flip it, maybe the sort of the suburban, upper middle class church that really doesn't have any poor or needy, and thinking that that's sort of the subset of people we really want to be with and worship with. This is not looking at it appropriately. In a sense, all of us have hurt. All of us have needs. We're all poor and needy in spirit. And so, trying to go out and hit this random sample, in a sense, taught us that there's people hurting in all segments of society.
And that's the true need.
Right.
The spiritual need is the true need, which is common to all of us.
It's common to everybody.
We forget about that all the time.
Right. And if we just step out a little bit, we're going to see that there's openings to talk about deeper things with a lot of people.
Absolutely. Rob, this car ride has been awesome. I'm just struck by how much value there is in thinking through stuff and talking about it, like with another person. But I have a question for you. Where am I driving this car? Because I'm kind of aimlessly driving around on the road talking to you. So where are we headed? What's the next destination?
Well, I mean, I think naturally speaking, we almost need a sounding board. If you're stuck in the car with the same person for a long time and you're talking back and forth, maybe your perspective becomes limited.
Are you getting tired of me, Rob? Do you want to get out of the car?
So, yeah, I do. No, I'm just teasing. No, I guess what we would be saying is that it's probably time to talk to some friends and see what they would have to say about some of these issues.
I agree with you. So are we gonna like talk exclusively about the street interviews, or are we talking about more? What do you want to talk about? I agree. What do we want to talk about?
I think I think getting some perspective on that, but also just talking through, what we see the church doing, well. We're, in a sense, we're the people that if we were asked, do you attend church, we would say yes. And then we would have to answer the question, what do you think your church is doing well, and what do you think your church isn't?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And to the listener, I hope you've been encouraged by not only listening to the last episode of the street interviews, but some of our reflection on it. I encourage you to reflect on it. What did you gain from it? What can you adapt in your life? Whether you're someone who doesn't go to church, maybe it gave you a new seed, a seed of hope to think through. If you are a churchgoer, maybe you have an idea of stepping out of your comfort zone and what a next step to take. I hope both of those things happen. That's why we're doing this podcast. We want to encourage others. We want to think deeply about stuff, but towards action. So thank you for listening and for joining us for another episode of A World in Tension.